Hi, everyone. So, as we talk about GDP and we talk about different economic concepts, economic characteristic, one thing that your textbook is kind of missing, because it's a neoclassical textbook, is difference between savings and investments. So here's the situation. In neoclassical and classical tradition, those are rather same things. So let's have a little journey. So we got income, in particular tax, after tax income. So income is divided into savings and consumption. That is where neoclassical and pretty much all the economists agree, Keynesians, neoclassical, others. So we have household income and we divide it into two things, consumption and savings. And in neoclassical tradition, savings automatically transfer to investments. So you put money in a bank or investment portfolio somewhere else, and you sort of kind of based on rational theory, as you can imagine, rational economic agent that we study in microeconomics. Based on that, you wouldn't just keep money. And so there is some reasoning to that. However, so again, neoclassical, and that's what you have in textbook. It's pretty much, you saw this, and then savings become investments and work for the economy. However, Keynes pointed out the following. And for me, especially as a former investment analyst and investment manager, that makes way more sense. Savings, according to Keynes, are divided into two things, reserves plus. So part of savings are investments. However, another part are reserves, and reserves are deposits mostly. Deposit in a bank or just checking accounts. And those are, they have different purpose. Investment is allocation of capital with purpose of creating value and generating additional income. So it's very important to actually remember the proper definition, because with time, finance took over, and in finance, in recent 3 decades, there is a movement to call everything investment, even things that are not investments, fundamentally. Fundamentally, there should be creation of value, allocating capital with the purpose of creating new value, and in that way, generating profit. If you're allocating capital without creating value to make money, to generate profit, that is called speculation. Speculation has a bad rap as a linguistically, and because it is actually problematic things. So finance pushed this speculation word and a term out of use, and everything is investment. But if you buy an asset that is already created and you do not create any value, that is speculation. And that's very important in economics, because in economics, we look how we develop, and we cannot develop through speculation because we already developed the asset. So if you buy a ready-made house and just expect the price of that house to grow, that is speculation. That is not investment. That's very common to call it real estate investments and things like this, but that's not investment. It's real estate speculation. Investment, if you buy, let's say, an old house, you renovate it, or you buy land and you build a house, you create value, you create something new, and that is a source of your additional income. In speculation, the source of your profit is price increase. And that could be a good strategy, but in economics, it's very important. It doesn't create any benefit. Speculation are mostly negative. They have a negative reputation for a reason. For economic systems, speculations are mostly negative. There are some works that point out that sometimes could be positive. mostly again through Keynesian, this version of expectations and optimism. When people speculate, they kind of create optimism. Some speculations and in hard times could be beneficial as they kind of develop optimism. Oh, I made some money on this market. I didn't create anything, but I create optimism, and that's the value. But sort of on a deeper level, everything that does not create a new value is not an investment and is not very useful for economic system, because we just use resources, we use capital for assets that we already have. And as we're going to learn later, it's one of the biggest problems we have in today's financial world. We have, especially in developed countries, we have so much money, so much capital that we could solve all our economic problems pretty easily. However, about 90% of that capital, if not more, is not invested properly. It's not invested in creating new value. It's allocated in safe assets that might have some spillover effects to creating value, but most of them are not. But that's a topic for actually next week. This week, as we summarizing and going deeper level to GDP, measuring economy, and later unemployment, it's important to get this part. So savings are divided into reserves and investments. And what's more important, that during the good times, there is no conflict between neoclassical and Keynesian economics, because during the good times, which statistically proved by econometrics, effectively statistical analysis, that during the good time, the most people have a fixed proportion between reserves and investments. Meaning, let's say you have additional $10,000 to your income during the good times, and overall it's about 80-20. So 80% people try to invest out of, again, after consumption. So if you have savings, $10,000, you want an extra savings, you would allocate 8,000 to investment portfolio, whatever it is, and 2,000 to your sort of reserves. Again, reserves, pretty much cash on your bank account. So it's checking, savings account in a bank. It could be higher ranked bonds like municipal bonds or treasuries or AAA rated bonds. So if you have no idea what it is, you will take Finance 300, or if you're kind of early in your studies, you will take another course that we are developing instead of Finance 300 for non-financial majors, but you will learn a little bit about that. Nevertheless, it's cash, it's high rank, almost no risk bonds, and gold, things like this. Those are reserves. And investments is something that creates value. It's debatable, but we allocate stocks, real estate, things like this into investments. Again, real estate, ideally something that you develop, or at least if you bought it, you rearrange the system. So you try to rent it out by parts, for example, and things like this. You can buy like a condo and then rent out each apartment and be a manager. So there is some value creation in that, even though you don't build real estate itself. There is value creation in kind of optimizing how you use real estate, but at least something should be there. So during the good times, the proportions are similar. So the logic that neoclassical economists are concerned with are mostly how to increase income and talk about GDP, income taxes, things like this. And so everything goes, income goes up, savings go up, investment go up. And so in good times, nothing contradictory happens. And this difference is not that important. You have your reserves, you can think again about yourself quite similar. If everything's fine, the fact that you have some reserves doesn't really matter for your decision making, because they're constant shares, like you put something on your reserve and the rest you invest or do like this. However, during the bad times, so good times, I will put here good times, income, I would say neoclassical and Keynesian economists agree on the following. If income goes up, this leads to investments up. But during the bad times, neoclassical economists still believe that income up leads to investments up. But Keynesian economists believe differently. It doesn't like equal sign. Keynesian economist, Keynes himself, kind of offered that, but this particular piece was created in 80s and after, so way past Keynes, because that's when neoclassical economists absorbed Keynesian version to some extent. So they accepted that during bad times, government should interfere. And so they did it. And then they revised, like kind of twisted Keynes a little bit, quite a lot actually. And so why it's important? Income goes up, investment go up during the bad times, same as the good times. So it's partly a reminder that neoclassical economics doesn't really differentiate good times, bad times. The whole vision is different. There are no good times and bad times. There is just time and shocks, like a heartbeat. You got a straight line and then shock, shock, shock. And so there is no concept of good time and bad time, and no business cycles effectively. And so anytime income goes up, investments go up. And that's why government gives us paychecks during pandemic, because what they want is to income go up when we lost jobs, income went down. So artificially government tries to bring up income, believing that we will improve investments and actually kickstart the economy. And Keynes, or Keynesian economists that sort of follow Keynesian logic and say that's not how it is, because again, expectations. If in bad times income up, that leads to savings up, but investments down. And I would put here to explain up, maybe like this. I'll put real big up. Because if we add during bad times, if we give up people extra income, but we don't change the perception that the times are bad and then tomorrow will be worse than today, people will put those money on a bank account and save. And then they will not invest because times didn't change, the expectation didn't change. And in fact, they will decrease investments, which is a logical response during the bad times. You sell your investments if you can, you sell your stocks. Right now, everyone's out of stocks. Pandemic actually was a little different, because most people who got really hurt were quite below average. And people who are wealthy and on like a top of food income distribution, they actually got better off because they could work online, most of them, they could keep their job. They moved out A lot of them retired, so that's another thing. If they experienced, they retired. But a lot of professionals, 2020 was pretty good, especially in finance, because they reduced their costs by not going to office, by moving to a cheaper rental place. You don't have to live in Manhattan. You don't have to live in San Francisco anymore. So IT and finance, 2020 was the best year for those two industries, because for people who work there, because they reduced the cost as everything went sort of sideways, but they keep their job and they keep their income. And so their investments went up, because those are the people that actually invest in stocks, at least. So that's a little tricky. But right now, we do have problems, real problems, and the fear of bad times hitting finance and hitting IT as well, because we do have inflation. We are kind of going back to office. So for those people who enjoy that life, now, they have to go back and renting expensive places again. So we see investments going down, even though income is growing. And that is one of the things that neoclassical economics cannot get. If income is up, the economy should be doing well, investment should go up, and the economy should start moving. But Keynes explained, if incomes go up, it's a conflict between reality and a perception of reality that we talked about before. Your reality improving, your income is going up, but your perception is unchanged, partly because income goes up artificially. If that's a government support program, then what people see, and I think next week, your essay will be on Yanis Varoufakis. He explains very well, explains how entrepreneurs think, how investors actually think. They always think about macroeconomic situation, not just, I got extra 10K from the government. They think, well, 2K. They think, okay, why did this happen? Something is not right. If something is not right, how is going to be my business? My business is going to struggle. If my business is going to struggle, I have to downsize my investments, and I have to kind of prepare for the impact, make situation worse. So that's happened quite often. You have, in reality, good things happening, but you're still afraid of future, and you think those are not real good things. Those are kind of artificially created optimism to trying to boost economy, but you don't buy it, basically. And that's a kind of big part of macroeconomic policy is this behavioral studies, whether we should tell people, as a government should tell people about intentions of their policy, because this problem appears if people know that the government is doing something because something is bad, they wouldn't buy it. And if they wouldn't buy it, the policy won't work. And because the aim of policy is to change perception. So if in this case, the government is gonna do something about inflation, if you don't buy it, whatever they do won't work. That's very true about many policies, because they are targeting perception. Government is limited in market economy. They cannot really change reality. They can change perception. They can have, one good project. They can have this like spike that change, this is happening. Or good policy, they cannot save the world effectively. They can say, they can make the spark that will inspire investors to save the world effectively from economic downturn. So with inflation, same thing, especially with inflation, because it's even more based on expectation. So usually inflation starts with something real, like in our case, oil prices going up and car prices also going up. for actually two different reasons, sort of, but just coincidence, two markets do experience supply chain issues. Like there is a real, not imaginary problems there. But all other markets have no problems. It's all about expectations. And as you're going to see in this week, actually in conversation with Joseph Stiglitz, it's about market power too, because companies realize that even though there is no inflation, they can just increase prices and make more money and blame it on the government. And because they collectively have more and more power, their own market concentration increase, they're not punished for that. In other times, in a more competitive environment, they would be punished by their competitors, or in a more regulatory environment, they would be punished by a more responsible or kind of more aggressive government, like in European countries. They're very, if a company goes something like to destroy economy, but to make money, they cut it out right, in the beginning, try to do that at least. And they're not afraid even of Google. They went against Google, Apple, went against Goldman Sachs. Every time the company used like a market opportunity to make social welfare worse, but to make money, if that's obvious, and that happens quite often. If you're the only one providing a good, and you create a artificial crisis that people need your product more, you make money. So what's happening with inflation quite a lot with other markets is that companies start increasing price because just they can, and they drive perception of inflation. And that's the real danger. Because if we all, and I see from your response, believe that there is inflation, there's going to be inflation. And it's going to be worse and worse because everyone's going to feed into this because that's how they make money. If there's no inflation, real reason for inflation, but you just increase price, you make more money as a business. And yeah, so that's a problem, expectations. And to fight this, so the government has to stop it. The government has to do something about inflation, and came out mostly, even not the government, as central bank, as we're going to learn next week about money and inflation and other things related to money and how to deal with it. But you need to represent power, basically, to the companies and people. You need to tell companies, businesses, consumers, everybody that there will be no inflation. And you have to have quite a credible threat towards businesses that create that inflation artificially. And we don't see that. And that's a danger because there is always, again, as I told, feeding into inflation expectations is profitable. And so more and more companies doing that, kind of creating their own overall downturn. So one of major part of microeconomics in today's world is game theory, which explains how it's a very unique mathematical actually piece of knowledge, but it explains situation where everyone individually is doing the right thing, and yet the result is catastrophic. And it's like a trap, because if everyone is doing the right thing, you cannot say, oh, like the company is wrong, or the government is wrong, or the consumers are wrong. Individually, they're all doing what they can. But because they do not cooperate, and that's a lesson from game theory, as you don't take micro, maybe you do, or you will, then you'll learn later. But the lesson from game theory is very interesting. If you don't cooperate, even if you do the right thing, catastrophic events happened, and then not just by chance. They happen by actions of people, and that's how inflation happens. Like what you're gonna do today, for example, how to deal with inflation. If you do not cooperate with government, and as consumers, what can we do? Like we can, even if we know that we need to cooperate, it's very difficult to actually cooperate. We need other powerful companies and businesses and government to cooperate to stop inflation. But if they want, and if people believe that they want, then it's going to be inflation. It's going to be not great, to put it mildly. So expectations versus reality is very important to distinguish. So that's the difference. And for this particular topic, it's important to realize that during the bad times, you can improve income, but that is not enough, according to Keynesian economists, because you improve income without changing expectations, all that income will go to checking accounts and will do nothing for the economy. And that's even more powerful today, because in 2008, while we printed tons of money, about 70% of that capital didn't go anywhere. And that's why the recovery from that crisis was so slow, because, as again, we're going to learn a little later next time about money, and what happened in 2008 was all about money, because we had like this experiment that we were forced to perform. We doubled the amount of money in about 2 days. And imagine, like today, right? All the US dollars that exist, money, represent value. We just doubled it in 2 days. In a conventional wisdom, this neoclassical sort of school of thought, that is micro-based. So if you think, and that's how your parents mostly think as they grew up with that theory of money. And that's why money is the most interesting topic going forward, because no one understands it really well, very few people. If you think as about government money and US dollar, as you think about your personal budget, and you think, well, if my money goes, doubles, and so everybody else, there's going to be inflation, it's going to be just losing value of money because it's just paper representing value. But that's not what happened, because for that to happen, you have to actually spend those money, and those money have to be distributed equally. What happened in 2008, the money went to bankers, billionaires and millionaires who were bankrupt. And a lot of those money or those bankruptcies were because their claims, like they borrowed money and they were not able to repay. And so think about debt, right? If you borrow money for a house, let's say you bought a house, $300,000, you borrowed money, you paid $2,000 a month for that loan. If you miss a payment of $2,000, you don't own bank $2,000. You have to actually, not right away, I think they give you about 6 months top. But okay, 6 months, so 2 by 6, you got $12,000. You missed $12,000 to a bank. Then by your typical contract, you will have now to repay all the debt. That's it. Like that, you no longer own 12,000. You own the whole 300 back that you borrowed, because you violated the contract. The contract is off. Pay back all the money you got. And that's what happened in 2008 massively. Pretty much all the banks, actually, literally all the banks in US missed their requirements to be solvent, meaning those contracts that they have with everybody else that make them solvent institution that were violated, which means they now had to pay all the debt to all other institutions because they violated the contract. And so they needed a lot of money. But when they got money, they became kind of solvent, they negotiated, and they didn't spend it because they just kind of, put it back on deposit, and they were also very afraid. And so it was a very interesting experiment because we double amount of money, but we didn't use almost nothing of it. It was just bank's account, and we created that, which again questionable, but in generally, even if you are kind of pro that, there is a school that think it's not a big deal. Still, you could use that money for something better, like improving the economy and things like this. So it's kind of a little side note, but it's important to understand that concept and difference between savings and investments. In bad times, you can boost savings, and the government has, with central bank, especially again, government as president and department, not really, but Federal Reserve can boost savings quite significantly, motivate people to save. However, that will not result in investments. And during the bad time, if you believe tomorrow is worse than today, the fact that Federal Reserve give you zero interest loan, not helping. Yeah, it's a great loan, but I'm not going to borrow that money because what I'm going to do with it? I'm going to save. Maybe I'm going to borrow and buy government bonds. That's exactly what happened in 2008. So that's a little kind of adding to your lectures this week. Let me know if you have any questions.